Afternoon. What I'd like to do is talk a bit about the What Works Centre for Wellbeing, which we set up in the UK about 18 months ago now. I think the first thing to do is to set the political context. So there is no doubt that political attitudes towards wellbeing have been changing. I never fail to be impressed when I hear our friends from Bhutan speaking. It's enormously impressive, and I never fail to be moved when I listen to the speech by Bobby Kennedy back in 1968 about essentially well-being and GMP. Europe has probably come to the party quite a lot later than that, and perhaps it's interesting that the interest among politicians in Europe has tended to sit on the centre-right rather than in more perhaps liberal areas that you might have expected. And as we've heard already, a lot of the drivers for that are an increasing dissatisfaction with GDP as a measure of societal progress. And if you look at it at an individual or a country level, then it's quite clear that although there is a linkage, of course, as we've just heard, there appears to be diminishing returns as you increase income, diminishing returns on well-being. And if we look at the UK, over the last 40 years or so, we had a sustained period of over 25 years of year-on-year improvements in GDP, and yet life satisfaction over that period remained entirely flat. So one of the first things that David Cameron did when he came to power in the UK back in 2010 was to ask the Office for National Statistics to develop a comprehensive set of measures that would allow us at national level to look at well-being in the UK and to track movement over time. And the definition that the ONS used is one that will be familiar to all of us, I suspect, in the room. And they created what we call the Wellbeing Wheel, the ONS's Wellbeing Wheel for the UK, which is shown there. It consists of 41 measures in 10 domains, and of those 10 domains, personal well-being or subjective well-being, and Andrew Oswald gave you the 4 questions that make that up, that appears to be a particularly important element of measuring well-being. Now, like many people in the UK, I went to bed on the night of the 23rd of June last year, feeling quite comfortable with my own sense of personal identity. I'm someone whose roots are in 3 of the 4 nations of the United Kingdom. I think of myself as a European. I woke up on the morning of the 24th of June, and much of that was shattered, and I felt personally hurt and guilty and all sorts of other emotions. But one of the emotions I shouldn't have felt was surprise, because our colleagues in the New Economics Foundation in the UK have taken that ONS data and they have mapped on the results of that UK referendum against wellbeing data. And what they show really quite clearly is that the areas of the UK with the highest levels of inequality in wellbeing are those that voted to leave. Regardless of where people sat, those communities sat in terms of absolute wellbeing, it was the divergence in wellbeing that mattered. And colleagues at the LSE have done similar analysis of looking at electoral results across Europe. And what it boils down to, for my simplistic interpretation of it, is that for every standard deviation fall in national well-being, you get something like an 8% swing against the party in power. So, as a politician, whether you are really interested in improving the lot of your people, or you're just driven by the desire to remain in power, that naked ambition, which is sometimes obvious in some politicians, then whichever way it is, you ought to take an interest in well-being. I like to think it's the former that has been the motive for our former Prime Minister, David Cameron. But about 2.5 years ago now, he asked that we set up a What Works Centre for Wellbeing in the UK, and he asked Lord Gus O'Donnell, who headed up the civil service for 10 years, to do that for him. And the centre, which I now chair, has a vision where the well-being of people and communities improves year on year, with a particular focus on inequalities, that well-being should be the ultimate objective of all public policy, and that in order to do that, we wish to create robust elements and disseminate that widely to inform public policy. And we are set up in a way which is partly funded by government, but definitely not part of government. We are independent. And I think one of the lessons I would suggest to others that are maybe thinking about something similar in their own countries is government support is essential, but don't allow that government support to be channeled through one particular ministry. So you'll see from the slide there that it's not just the Ministry of Health, which is part of this funding partnership. It's also Ministry for Communities, Ministry for Work, Ministry for Defence, Ministry for the Environment. And then other actors too, funding bodies, the private sector, and a range of NGOs are all part of this grouping and indeed back up that interest and collaboration with funding. And that gives us a lot of power in terms of reach. It also creates some challenges. There's a phrase in English that sometimes things feel like you're herding cats. And with this number of partners, it can feel like that sometimes. But I think overall, it is a benefit. It does add power. So what is a What Works Centre? It, at the moment, is a particularly British institution. They're centres, essentially, that bridge the gap between knowledge and action. So it's looking at the evidence that does exist, taking a systematic approach to that, synthesizing it, translating it into a format that works for policymakers, and then disseminating it. We currently have 9 What Works centres in the UK. We work together as a network to try and avoid duplication and to share learning. And the different centres focus on things like not just well-being, but also health, education, crime, also related to specific parts of the United Kingdom with their own issues, and then other things like childhood and ageing. So a whole range of issues for which a What Works network might be considered appropriate. We have an evidence programme. Our initial evidence programme has 4 main themes. Those themes are well-being across the life course. The second one is community well-being. The third is work and learning. And the fourth is culture and sport. And each of those themes is delivered together with a range of academic partners, and indeed some partners from outside of academia in the NGO sector. And we work together as a virtual centre in order to deliver the products that I'll talk a wee bit about more in a minute. We have a programme running through to June of next year. If you go onto the website, you can see what might be of particular interest to you, and indeed you can sign up for alerts. We'd be delighted if you did that and joined part of our movement. We, as always with this sort of thing, you set something up, it takes a while to start producing what I call product. We've started producing product towards the end of last year. What I've shown there are the covers from a couple of the documents that we produced just before Christmas, so one on housing and well-being and one on measurement using subjective well-being in practice. And in essence, what we're looking to do with all of these is to pull together the evidence, to translate it into something meaningful. I'll say something a bit more about that in a minute, from which you can draw policy guidance, identify where gaps exist, and then we seek to disseminate that information through a variety of channels. The first evidence batch that we released related to music and singing. I'm not sure it would have been the first one I would have chosen personally, but it's what our stakeholders told us they were interested in, of great interest to the non-governmental sector, the charity sector, but also to the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And what you have there is just a look of the way that we present the guidance. What we do is we rate, so in a simple way to show the strength of the evidence that we are putting forward, to show people the different groups that that evidence may be impacting on, so healthy adults, young offenders, pregnant women, the workplace, and highlighting where there are significant gaps in evidence. And Yes, I'm not sure you can read that, but just, I won't pick out all the findings. You can go onto the website and read it for yourself. But a couple of things that have come out very strongly are that with older people, participating in community singing not only helps with their well-being, it's also protective against developing mental health problems in later life, and that's a huge issue for older people. For young adults, listening to music is particularly powerful in terms of allaying anxiety. So those of us that have had or do have teenage children that lock themselves away with the music, honestly, they're doing it to improve their own well-being. It may not feel like it at the time, but that's what they're doing. Perhaps more seriously, when you then look at that evidence in the context of prisons and young offenders institutes, there is moderate evidence to show that using music in that way reduces the level of anger in that prison population. And when, as in the UK, you have a prisons crisis with riots breaking out on a regular basis, introducing simple interventions that can help reduce the amount of anger in those institutions has to be a good thing. It doesn't mean there aren't systematic problems that need to be addressed too. People constantly don't want to hear, well, this is the findings. They want practical examples of what they then do. So we back that up with practical examples from real life about what people have done, how they've implemented things, and the impact that has had. So each of our products, if you like, follows that same format of showing the evidence in that way. So what we're aiming to do with the centre is not to create a big building, glass and concrete and chairs and furniture are not what we're all about at all. It's much more of a movement. We're aiming to persuade people that evidence-based practice has to become the standard. It distresses me how often policies are implemented on little or no evidence. That measuring interventions has to be a critical part of what we do. So often we do things and then we think later on, well, we ought to have measured that. It's too late by then. We have to plan the measurement when the intervention is being planned in the first place. And also we do a lot of things within our society which aren't necessarily driven by trying to improve well-being, but they have an impact on well-being. So it's easy to do. Let's measure well-being as part of that. I've spent most of my working life working in industry. An awful lot of work in this area goes on in industry. No one ever hears about it. I would suggest, as I do to my colleagues, that sharing experiences is a moral obligation for all of us because all evidence is of value. Now, of course, a randomized controlled trial will remain the gold standard, but we won't know where to carry out those randomized controlled trials if we don't have the experience of other smaller scale, perhaps less high quality interventions and those evaluations. So we must do that too. Translation is key. Government can't do everything. I would argue government shouldn't do everything because particularly in the well-being area, the organisations that often make the biggest difference are not governments. They're local communities, they're businesses, they're NGOs. All of those actors have a role to play in this, but those actors need the evidence just as much as government. Now, in July of this year, I'll hit my 40th anniversary of being a practicing physician, having killed remarkably few people in that time. Now, I'm a slow learner, but one of the things I have learned in talking to patients is that if you want to communicate with them properly, you have to pitch your language in the language that is meaningful to them. If we pitch our evidence on well-being in the language of academia or the language of the policy wonk, then we're not going to influence some of the key people that need to know about this stuff. So let's think about the way that we communicate that and make that a key part of what we do in terms of taking forward the science of well-being. So a What Works Centre is, of course, about what works. It's also about why things work, how it works, and then trying to communicate that effectively. Thank you.